How do you make your world feel as if it's a living, breathing entity rather than just a background thing that the players don't have to worry about? Hello, my fellow creators, DMs, storytellers, narrators, GMs, game masters, whatever your title might be. You run TTRPGs and you're here to try and hopefully improve upon your skill, learn something new, or just reaffirm what you already knew. Well, this is the place. My name is Guy, and today we are going to be looking at how to make your world space feel as if it's a living, breathing space without going insane by having to track hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different things all at the same time. It's a complex space, and the more you think about it, the worse it seems to get, unless you simply step back and realize that the players don't have access to information from all over the space, and at the same time, there are only certain things that can actually happen in a world space that will actually make kind of talkable news. So by focusing on those things, it gives us a tremendous amount of power to make our world seem as if it's alive without having to track 10,000 things. How are we going to do that? Well, that's what we're talking about in today's video. Right, how do you make your world feel alive? Well, as far as I'm concerned, there are two things that can happen that are really useful and that allow us to do this in a way that makes things happen. And that's foreground events and background events. And the two are quite important. Foreground events should only occur once in a while, maybe like once in every 6 or 7 or 8 gaming sessions, depending on how long your sessions are. But they're not going to happen very often. And the reason is they're going to fundamentally change your world space. So we need to be aware that they are very impactful. But they do have to happen. And the reason for this is, although the player characters are going to be running their adventures and their stories, and they are going to have an impact on your world space, and they should be having an impact on your world space, they are but one entity within a greater space. So if we want to make this greater space feel like it's alive, other stuff has to happen that the players are not responsible for, but which the players will feel the consequences for. Again, this is just helping simulate that living space. Background events are events that can happen on a more regular basis, but are also there just to let the players know that stuff changes. Things change. The only constant is change. So we put in background adventure, or background events, I should say, not adventures, background events, as and when we need to spice things up a little bit, but also to keep the game feeling as if it's alive. These are not going to have game-changing, world-shattering event effects, but they will have some kind of impact on the PCs. And here's the important thing, folks. Whether it's a foreground event or a background event, if it doesn't impact the PCs at all, it's a waste of your time, because no one will know that it's happened except for you. And that's not worthwhile. That's not useful. So we want useful stuff here. All right, so what do I mean when I talk about foreground events? Foreground events are giant things. Revolution. The kingdom or the space nation that the PCs are in suddenly breaks out into revolution. Revolutions are terrifying things. There's lots of war, there's lots of opportunity, there's lots of violence, there's lots of politicking going on. There is just so much stuff that happens. What doesn't happen are things like trade. Things like people honoring their contracts or giving a damn about the petty things that seem to be so important in the past. So a revolution is a big thing, and its ramifications continue forward as well. Once the revolution has started, how does it end? Who wins? Is it the old guard that managed to hold on to their power, or is it the new revolutionaries who managed to hold on to the power? Are the revolutionaries the good guys or the bad guys? These are these questions. You don't have to answer them, by the way, when you launch your revolution. All that you need to do is let the PCs know that a revolution has started. Birth of a nation. A new nation is created. It could be that there were a whole bunch of factions that were not united. They were very small little nomadic tribes, or they were city-states, and they've now just signed into accord a new nation. This new nation has arisen. And that has serious implications. There are lots of adventures that come out of that as well. Preventing the nation from being created, trying to break the nation down before it really gets going. Even discovering the new logo or the new flag for that nation is important. Natural disasters. These are huge. There are so many natural disasters, and they will be specific to the tone of your world. So if you have natural disasters and your tone is gritty, okay, well, a mudslide is now not only gritty, but also a mudslide is now going to result in famine. It's going to result in cannibalism. If the main road to the town has been destroyed by a mudslide and food can't get in or get out, you can really explore your tone in terms of the effects of this mudslide. Magical calamity. This is something I've used it in my own game recently, where a nation basically has erased itself because of a magical experiment that went wrong. The ramifications are slowly coming through, and this is the point that I want to make with regards to how one enacts these kind of events. So a magical calamity destroys all of the beings within this particular nation that I have on my world space. What are the ramifications? Well, firstly, people have to notice that it's even happened. So that can take a couple days, or it could be an adventure that the PCs are on. We haven't heard from our friend so-and-so. Wouldn't you go and check what's happened? And they arrive at a village that is completely deserted. There is no sign of anyone, just piles of bloody clothing as a result of the magical explosion that happened. Well, what's going on? They can explore, but now you look at it and go, well, what would have happened? The wildlife maybe would have started to eat the things if the wildlife had survived, or perhaps now looters have arrived to start going through these literally just empty castles. Perhaps there's some lingering magical effect. Maybe the spirits of all of these folk that were killed have come back to try and seek justice. You can have a field day. But further to that, now what's happening after a couple weeks is there are nations on the borders that are going, there's a lot of very valuable land with property that has been developed and is now sitting literally waiting for us to go in and claim it. There are giant castles with treasuries filled with cash. We need to go there now. And so what's happened is my magical calamity then suddenly turns into another type of foregroundy event, the invasion, where an army is invading or there is a war going on, because all of the nations that surround this particular entity will want to claim that space as fast as they can. And when they get to those borders don't exist yet. So they'll need to be drawn up. There's another adventure for the PCs. You're being hired not only by the elves, but also by the dwarves to delineate a border between the two. And both will send representatives to try and convince the PCs of making the border more in favor of the one species or the other species. And they will send assassins to try and prevent this whole thing from happening. And bribery and corruption and da-da-da-da-da. Just a whole bunch of things from one little magical calamity that was triggered several weeks earlier, and that the fallout is now happening. And then what happens if those species that were eliminated, what happens if one or two of them start coming back? Do they have to reclaim their territory? Do they have to hire the PCs to get them back onto the throne so they can claim their sovereignty again and push out the invading people? Do you see how these foreground events, they are going to be very impactful in your game? But at the same time, it's like, whoa, this is kind of real. This is stuff that the PCs didn't have a hand in. They're now involved in it, and they can now shape it and claim it and use it as their own, or they can move away to a different part of the map and do something else. Now, what happens if you have launched one of these things and you go, oh, but that's where the PCs need to go. They need to get into that tomb, which is now in a space where the leader, this is another kind of foreground event, has died. The death of an important figure. The leader has died and the entire nation is in a state of mourning. Everybody has to wear black. That's just something that's traditional for a lot of countries. Everyone has to wear black. No one can laugh. Certain words are banned. So if the party are trying to get somewhere and this thing has happened and they don't want to go there anymore, does that mean that your entire campaign stalls whilst you play out this revolution or death of a figure or the collapse of an economy? Do you have to wait for that? Not at all. What you then need to do as the GM is to provide an alternative route for the players to get to where they're going, albeit a dangerous route. So if the party go, oh, you know what? That place has just had a major ideological shift. That's another idea for a foreground event. We really don't want to go there. We don't like that idea. We're going to go somewhere else. Well, now one of the people within that nation has heard that the player characters are trying to get to wherever they're going, and will offer them to secretly get them through some underground tunnels that nobody knows about, except that the tunnels may be occupied by inhabitants that don't want them there. It's a new adventure that still gets them to their goal, and the point is that the player characters will still feel like this world is living and breathing and changing and altering. So foreground events you really don't want to overuse, because it will get tiring if there's constantly war and revolutions and this and that and death and da-da-da-da-da. We don't necessarily want to do that. Background events, there are so many background events that you can launch. A tax change, legislation amendments, a discovery of a new item or a new place, a new guild is formed, a new form of entertainment comes about, cultural folly starts happening. Everyone starts wearing ruffs, so you can't actually eat because your ruff is so big your arm can't get all the way around your ruff. True story. Crazy human beings, right? Just look at our history and you will be inspired. So background events are simple little things. A new item becomes available on the market, but not like, oh, we've now got a longsword Mark II. It's just sharper. It's a thing along the lines of, okay, well, now we have longswords with retractable blades. So the entire longsword that's usually 4.5 feet now shrinks all the way down to being a mere 6 inches. And you can keep that in your pocket. It's a great new invention. Well, kind of yes, except for people fiddling with the sword in their pocket and suddenly they cut their own leg off. That's an adventure in itself, is it not? So there are these opportunities for you by triggering these things that happen in the background or in the foreground. Suddenly these adventures just erupt out of it. So if your campaign is going along and everyone's having fun and you kind of go, you know what, let's chase it up a bit. Let's change it up a bit. The players have been going through the same kind of stuff over and over and over and over again. We need to change it up. Throw in a foreground event. Now, these are tables that you can make. I don't like using random tables. I like using lookup tables. And the difference is I like to go, well, you know what? This particular event would not be appropriate to my game from a thematic perspective or from a tonal perspective. But this event would be. So rather than using the table to randomly determine what happens, use the table to inspire yourself to come up with these ideas. Now, the table, of course, I'm referring to is you create a table of all of these things before your campaign even starts, and you are golden. You'll only use that table maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the entire campaign for the foreground events. Background events you'll use as you need. That table will be with you for your entire gaming life. I promise you, these are really useful things to use. That's enough from me for this week. I hope it's been insightful and helpful for you in terms of moving your campaign forward and making it feel as if it's a living, breathing space. More next week when we return. Until then, a massive thank you to you for watching all the way through to the end, to my wonderful patrons who are over here, I believe, who are just keeping the channel going and getting those amazing rewards at the end of every month. And until next time, I wish you and yours the happiest of gaming.